There we go. Thanks. So do I have 15 minutes? Is that okay? All right. And thank you, and I'll repeat Matt's thank yous to the Shanker Institute, to Bernie, to Leo, Vicky, and all the staff here who put on a great lunch. I got a lunch out of it. It's great on Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day to you all. I have a little love letter to ESSA I'd like to send, but it's not going to happen in my state. So, and I'll tell you why. And let me just also say, I mean, I kind of, like I tell people what's true, which is I'm an English teacher. I'm a high school English teacher, currently on leave as the president of a state teachers federation. And, you know, I try to, you know, bring that lens into my work as an advocate for the people that we represent in our cause and the profession. And so I try to, you know, I'm trying to think of these things. And when we're working with our state board on ESSA or what have you, you know, that's sort of the lens I try to bring. And also a parent of kids who have I've got a freshman in college and my youngest is an 8th grader, so I've got this, and another one in high school, and they've fully gone through the Illinois education structure and the full blossom of No Child Left Behind, really, is what we're still kind of like, we're living still today. So, you know, that's kind of all in my head as I think about these issues. And then, you know, one last thing, I'll quote Al Shanker. Actually, I read somewhere Al Shanker once said that when he was like union president now, you know, he really missed teaching. All he could do as union president was talk about it. And I feel that way often. Like now I got to talk about it, and I've been in this job 7 years, and it feels like a long time from, you know, my classroom experience. So, you know, so the question is the promise of ESSA being actualized? I mean, I would say, I guess it depends what you think that promise was. From my point of view, I think from teachers' unions, we would say, like, our hope would be that ESSA was promising a refocusing on equity and resources, and as Matt alluded to, dialing down the over-testing as we try to improve American education, and certainly on the teacher evaluation front, that again, dialing down on standardized testing and value added and things like that, and looking at, you know, more holistic measures that we think would give a better picture, not only of how teachers are performing, but how schools are doing in general. Like, that would be the hope for me. So I would say in Illinois, is that promise being actualized? No. Is it being realized? No, not yet. And mind you, we're looking at the plan. We don't have 5 years of ESSA in practice or something to judge by. But judging by the state's plan, I would say no. And it's, you know, we've said it's sort of like, you know, it's if an automobile, if No Child Left Behind now is gone, we've got this nice new shiny, beautiful car that replaced the old car we didn't like, but inside is still a kind of broken engine. And so that's where we are. I'm going to kind of give you like 4 or 5 kind of overall thoughts, and then I'll dig down deeper into a few specifics. So that's the first one, is that it's a more complicated version of No Child Left Behind with some improvements, but still an overemphasis on sort of testing, ranking, and sorting, and not enough emphasis on equity and sort of resources. We've seen, it's interesting, we've seen, I would say, school reform types, people who really will say they're sort of in the reformer world, kind of try to, I would say this, hijack the concept of equity. And that equity now, they'll say, is about outputs and not inputs. In other words, not resources and what school districts have to do their job with, but it's about where we look at test scores for kids, say, or teachers even. And we don't think that's right. And the third point is, and this is really, I mean, I really appreciate what Matt said about the genuine way in which in Pennsylvania they engaged educators and parents and community. I mean, I've got here, I just printed out the stack of comments. It's 100 pages maybe all told, and there's others too, and some online, that we've given the State Board of Education with really specific suggestions for improving, you know, before the first draft, improving this first to the second draft, and improving the second to third draft, and not one of them was taken. not one. When they started to have, when Tony Smith, our state superintendent, said, you know, we're going to go around the state and have this listening session with educators, I said, well, then why would you do it in the middle of the day? In regional offices of education where teachers will not be. Because, I mean, I taught for 18 years in Skokie. I couldn't tell you where our regional office of education was. And I was a very connected, you know, person to that sort of stuff. So we said, why don't you do it after school? Why don't you do it in school buildings? Well, they ended up doing that a little bit. I would say if you want to see more of what we did, you can go to our website, www.ift-aft.org, and there's a resources page, and there's a whole page of ESSA things that we did, including our draft, it's all public, our draft comments on the ESSA plan. We did reach out to teachers at one point when they started the listening tour. We thought, God, we're going to have to really get our members to like kind of wake up to this. And because the truth of the matter is, at that time, this is in early 16, I guess, if you had gone to the average teacher in Illinois or school worker and said, you know, what do you think about ESSA? They'd say, well, what's that? Right? So we tried to put in front of them, like, here are clear things at stake. You know, what do you think about the way teacher evaluation is going? What do you think about the way your school is ranked in low-performing schools and things like that? What do you think about testing for accountability for schools and districts? And they sent in thousands and thousands of comments in addition to the ones that we submitted as an organization. We had, I think we counted at least 200 meetings that we had members or IFT staff at, over 200 meetings in many, many different settings, our P20, our Illinois Balanced Accountability Measures group, you know, all their subcommittees, et cetera, and often, like one of the things that's in our comments, if you really want to read them, you'll see the Illinois Balanced Accountability Measures group is something we got off the ground a number of years ago to sort of say, this was before ESSA even, like, let's pull back on some of the testing, let's have smarter assessment. And we had school management totally with us, because they're not happy about it either, about the testing, right? And this governor's, so it wasn't a group controlled by our governor, who is Governor Bruce Rauner. He's a Republican. You know, that group now, he uses the governor-appointed P20 to overrule the Illinois Balanced Accountability Measures group's recommendations. So, I mean, that's the sort of jockeying we're running into. But I think, you know, one of the things, my first thought in this question for Illinois is you cannot begin to talk about equity and ESSA in Illinois without acknowledging the context of our school funding system. So, and let me just give you a very quick bit about what it's like and what we think it's going to become. Up until last year, Illinois had the most inequitable school funding in the nation. Depending on how you want to measure it, it was like 49th, 50th, maybe 48th on a good day in a different measure. Meaning we had the starkest gaps between dollars flowing to our poorest districts to our wealthiest districts. And furthermore, if because of a huge over-reliance on, and that it's really because of a huge over-reliance on property taxes, you could go to East St. Louis, Illinois, and see people taxed at the highest rates possible, and they have about $3,000 per kid. They can hardly make payroll, and virtually all their money comes from the state. And you can go up to New Trier, famous, well-appointed district, $27,000 a kid, relatively low tax rates. That's the disparity we have. And then within the city of Chicago, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, that there are big inequities is in New York City and other places, even within school systems, right? Really incredibly, Chicago continually has the best test scores in many schools in the country and in the state, in, you know, Northside College Prep and Walter Payton High School. And then, you know, you might have heard about like closing Dyett High School or the 4 high schools in Englewood, where, you know, those are buildings often that might be built for 1,000 kids and they have 400 kids in them with very little resources. Those are some of the inequities we've had. So we had some really great work done by some state senators, and we passed a new funding formula last year, evidence-based funding. It's really kind of a model in the nation, and you look at 27 indicators of what you need to do in a school to get performance, and then, you know, there's calculations about, well, what does it cost in your region to have, you know, for ESL teachers for your district, which is what we think you're going to need. And so you put together the needs. There's sort of a local assessment. What local capacity do you have to hit that target? And then, you know, the state fills in the gap. And it was controversial, but it was passed with Republicans and Democrats, and a huge, huge moment for us towards having more equity in school funding, K-12. And it was vetoed by the governor. Finally, a compromise was reached, which involved about $75 million in private school tax credits. For him to do that, he needed the private school tax credits. So that $75 million doesn't come out of school money per se. It comes out of the general coffers of the state of Illinois, which is, mind you, $13 billion behind in its in payments, in money owed. So this money is now held up because the governor has vetoed it again. Because he wants more schools added for private tax credits. So the $350 million new dollars that was going into this last year, no schools have seen a penny of it. And right now, as I'm talking, Governor Rauner is giving his state budget address, where I saw an advance copy, and he said, I'm going to put even more money, another $350 million into schools this year. But unfortunately, he's also transferring all the pension costs to local school districts, so there will be a net loss. Chicago public schools would lose $228 million. So that's the sort of political environment we're in. Let me just also say, with the new funding formula, which we believed in, we endorsed, it is really good. It was endorsed by school management. School management did a great job in helping to get this passed. It still is about $4 billion underfunded. And every Democrats and Republicans will tell you that same thing. And the plan is maybe over 10 years, if we can ramp up school funding, we can get there. Now, back to my point about equity outputs. When we were kind of negotiating this bill, Beth Purvis, who was at the time the Secretary of Education in Illinois, not the state superintendent, but the Secretary of Education, and she said, look, I believe in this evidence-based funding, this is terrific, you know, but I want to be clear, when the resources aren't there, and they won't be, we still expect you're going to have to hit all the targets. So, I mean, it just shows you the sort of like the non sequitur there. The whole theory of that is you can get to the targets when you have the resources. But the governor's office saying, yeah, that's fine, but no resources, get to the target. That's still what you're going to have to do, or not enough resources. I would just say, if you want to kind of hear or see, I think it's in the packet, I would refer you, we have something called the guidance, like ESSA guidance, I had it here somewhere, but it's in the packet. It's, we did work together with the, our guiding principles document. We worked together with the Chicago Teachers Union, who's one of our affiliates, and the Illinois Education Association. It was good for us as, you know, unions and practitioners to sort of stay on the same page, and you can see like our guiding principles going into the ESSA plan, you know, you'll see things like a broad, rich, meaningful curriculum, sufficient and equitable funding, wraparound services, and really importantly, appropriate time for staff to analyze, understand, get trained, to really succeed under the new plan. There's some specific points about accountability. We look for multiple indicators tied to district resources. We would like academic and school quality indicators, not weighted, that would disadvantage schools in poor neighborhoods especially. An effective implementation of a new accountability system that, again, would include time for people to learn what it means. And we're still uncomfortable about some of the college and career readiness goals and how they're structured, especially for those not planning on a college education. I think we've seen, all of us under No Child Left Behind, I can just tell you in Illinois, the withering of CTE, technical vocational education, you know, for understandable reasons around, say, STEM and things like that. But that's a part of our job as educators that really needs new life. And then on assessment, rooted in contents, best practices, not an indicator of poverty. You'll see in our notes there's a lot of good research that shows, for instance, in the city of Chicago, black and brown teachers tend to score lower on teacher evaluation. Teachers who teach in high poverty, high needs, high minority schools, high English language schools, high special ed population schools tend to score lower on teacher evaluation. And that's a problem. And we don't want to continue a system that does that. And then again, trying to pull back on the frequency of tests. And then there's some more here on teacher evaluation and our skepticism of some of the value-added models that are being, promoted. So let me just tell you, just like to quickly say what's in the ESSA plan on testing. The Illinois ESSA plan, which you can also read, it's on the state isbe.gov, I think is the website. But essentially, the plan goals are 90% proficiency for third grade reading at grade level or above, 90% for fifth grade math, 90% ninth grade on track for graduation and with their cohort, and 90% college and career readiness. And the testing that goes with that is content in grades 3 through 8 annually in ELA and math, the SAT in the 11th grade, science at 5th, 8th, and high school. We have a kindergarten test mandated called KIDS. That's, if you'll talk to our kindergarten teachers, it takes a lot of time. They're not happy with it, and they don't really think it's telling them anything they don't know. And then for kids with pretty significant special needs, something called dynamic learning maps. And there's also through grades 1 and 2 testing. So like that's the schedule of testing. We're a park state. A few years ago we were doing Prairie State exams. We were doing park and the ACT. So we've gotten rid of the ACT, moving to the SAT. We got rid of the Prairie State exam, now fully park, but now we're going park light. And that kind of highlights one of the last things I'll say about the challenge of ESSA is our state statute does not reflect ESSA, does not reflect even the state's new plan. And we've had a hard time gleaning from the state board what's the plan to alter state statute to make this work. And we haven't seen it yet, even though the plan is kind of in implementation. So teacher evaluation is driven by the Para-Law of 2010, a bill called SB 7 that was like 2011, a follow-up. There's been tremendous amounts of work over the last few years. Teachers and school leaders negotiating and developing really over the last 3.5 years, brand new teacher evaluation models. In Illinois, most of it is some version of the Danielson framework. If you talk to our folks, they'll say kind of a few things. One is often the response you get is like, it's not hurting us, like it's not killing us, like I'm not sure I want to change anything. Does it help you? Does it identify good teachers? No. Does it help identify bad teachers? No, no, no. It's just like they're not firing teachers right and left. Is it helping improve teaching? No. That's kind of like a common thing. But you'll also get places to be like, no, this is awful. Like all the good teachers are now proficient or needs improvement, and we've lost 4 tenured teachers who were actually just fine, and I don't know what to do about it. And so some of the state law that changed really moved towards seniority was taken out, for instance, and things like that for RIF lists and stuff like that. So there's no doubt with some of the state law changes we've seen senior teachers be removed. So that's problematic. But I mean, ultimately, in the end, I think for me, it's like there's so much time and expenditure of effort, of resources, of blood, sweat, and tears around an evaluation system that is really not doing anything useful for us. And I was at a thing at Crane's a while ago, and they said, well, we want it was this luncheon in Chicago. It was like, we want, what's your radical idea? Like, what's a radical idea? And so I thought, well, okay, what's a radical? I said, get rid of teacher evaluation. Now, I wouldn't say that permanently, and I'm not, and like gasps in the room. It's like, I'm not, like, mind you, the first 4 years you can fire any teacher for no reason at all in Illinois, and that's tremendous, churn, if you will, takes place then, and most of the incompetent teachers lose their jobs at that point. But for my money, if the millions of dollars in time and person hours we spent doing this evaluation thing over the last 3 years, if you used a fraction of that just for professional development, you'd have much, much, much better outcomes. So I don't see ESSA, as it's construed here in Illinois, going to change that soon. I think the things that we're most frustrated about it will change only if we have a new governor, frankly, which may well happen in November, but we don't know. I think, you know, I think that that's really, one last thing I did want to say is that, you know, one of the things in the ESSA plan is what do you do for low-performing schools, right? And we've had for some time RTI, response to intervention, which is now MTSS for us. I don't know if it is in other places, multi-tiered support services, I think, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've been in a classroom with a teacher who is in tears saying, this RTI is killing me. I test and test. I got to test the kids before any intervention has worked. You know, I'm testing every week in these poor children, and they're not like big standardized tests. You know, sometimes they're relatively light or small assessments, but the point is you're testing and testing without, and recording it all. And I think the fundamental problem for us with RTI, while we liked some promises around it, was there was really no resources for implementation. You know, so people in school districts, you know, principals and administrators, God bless them, they were trying to throw this thing together as quickly as they could to comply. They don't have, you know, professional development money to train people. The teachers are learning a new evaluation system, a new RTI. There's, gosh knows, all these different demands. And so it gets done, but maybe not done well. And so, and you'll see in our comments if you read, there's a very strong language about MTSS and our skepticism. And, you know, multiple points in the ESSA plan, we felt like they went ahead with things where we didn't have any data in sort of the beginnings of those kinds of programs over the last 3 or 4 years to suggest that that is making any positive difference in education. So why continue? Like, you know, let's maybe sit where we are for a little bit and see what the outcomes say. And especially because that MTSS gets to be featured prominently for low-performing schools. So low-performing schools under the new ESSA plan, you know, the state is really going down the path of vendors and putting out to bid the support for those schools to have vendors come in and work in schools to improve those outcomes. And again, there's not a lot of meat on the bones there to what that's really going to look like. So we're pretty concerned about that. And then the last thing on over-testing, and it's important to us, it shows up in our comments, is the opt-out provision, which has become a pretty, you know, big public issue in the country in the last couple of years. In the Illinois ESSA plan, there's a penalty if you don't have 95% of your kids taking the standardized test, which is pretty extreme. And there's a lot of parents and parent groups, especially in Chicago and the suburbs, that are very much into, you know, wanting to have the opt-outs possible. So we think that's sort of a tough penalty. And again, we'd like to see, you know, more creative and better assessments rather than the overwhelming continued stress on standardized tests. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.